I wish we could have a coffee or grab a beer and sit down and talk about concerns and how we could work together. You ask a really important question. In the light of a video that's come out of a pastor calling for the death penalty for all LGBT plus people, you ask, where are the Christians? You ask where all the people are who disagree with that theology, who are Christians. And you said, it's your religion, it's your cities, where are you? It's your responsibility to stand up against the rhetoric. And you make the point, which is an extremely important point, that Jesus would be out there protesting against the kind of things that clergy said. I watched your video a number of times because I really wanted to hear you out before responding. You're an excellent activist. You're a powerful speaker. I would love to have you speak at my church. I hope that I can respond in that kind of respect to your very important question. I hope to respond doing a couple of things, looking at the different worldviews of different Christian groups, the difference in the worldview between conservative Christians and progressive Christians, and how that makes a difference. I'm also hoping to look a little bit at some of the things that Christians have done, just kind of an overview of what progressive Christians have done and are doing, and then look, frankly, at the weaknesses that I see present within progressive Christian churches, church denominations, and among progressive Christian clergy. Probably the most conservative Christian denomination I can think of, just off the top of my head, would be Seventh-day Adventists. And another church denomination that I don't have a lot in common with would be Catholicism, the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church. But here's the interesting thing. I have more in common with progressive clergy, laity, and theologians in the Catholic Church and the Seventh-day Adventist Church than I do with some of the fundamentalists within my own church denomination. And the church denomination I attend is considered to be a progressive Christian denomination. My view of God is that God is so loving and caring and compassionate that there's no way that God would ever let anyone perish. That's a very different worldview than those who emphasize the judgment and anger and hatred of God, because that's what they see in the scriptures. Those two worldviews of God are really not very compatible. And what we've been hearing from people like this clergy is a view of God as a very hateful, vengeful God, not a loving and inclusive God. Pierre Trudeau, a Canadian Catholic man, was the Minister of Justice who managed to help see through Parliament a bill that allowed for the legalization of consensual adult same-gender sexual relationships. There's another contribution that I've seen Christians make in this country. Robertson Wesley United Church is not that far from where I live. It's in the same city. They donated the money to allow the United Church of Canada to seek intervenor status in the Supreme Court of Canada to stand with LGBT plus people to ensure that gay people and bisexual people could be protected in human rights legislation in the province of Alberta as it related to the workplace. That court decision, the Supreme Court of Canada, is considered to be pivotal in the decision that was made to allow for same-sex marriage in Canada from coast to coast to coast. The fact that gay people, lesbians, and bisexual people can marry another person of the same gender is indirectly due to the contributions of the United Church of Canada. Before the Pride festivals were a massive organization in some cities, there was something in the city where I lived called diversity conferences. They were organized and hosted by a retired Christian minister and his wife. The wife of this retired Christian minister was incredible. She said she had 5 sons and her only regret was that none of them were gay. That statement was life-changing for one of the more powerful activists in this province. When legislation was introduced into the province where I live, it would have allowed doctors and any other healthcare provider to refuse to provide any medical services, including a referral, if they had strongly held convictions on an issue related to the client. It was members of Christian and Unitarian churches who stood with the LGBT plus community because they realized this had the potential of meaning that doctors could allow LGBT plus people who were sick or had been injured in an accident to die. There were 2 Christians, a seminary student and an ordained minister, who were part of the working committee in the province where I live, a working committee aimed at trying to help develop legislation that would illegalize conversion therapy. And this is not just a Canadian thing, it's also an American thing. United Church of Christ wanted to advertise that LGBT people who had been excluded from their churches were welcome to come to United Church of Christ. All of the major TV networks in the U.S. refused to show the advertisement, claiming that it was too controversial, too political. The United Church of Christ promptly sued every single one of those news TV outlets, those big networks. The result was that they ended up with each of those networks playing the advertisement they refused to air and saying the United Church of Christ is suing us because we would not play this ad. And it was members of the United Church of Christ, Unitarian Universalists, and possibly another church denomination or two that launched a lawsuit for same-sex marriage. The lawsuit was based on the fact that their freedom of religious expression was being denied because they could not perform marriages for same-sex couples. And that is believed to be one of the reasons why Obama ended up supporting legislation in America that legalized same-sex marriage from coast to coast. We've looked at some of the positive contributions. Now let's look at some of the stuff we haven't done that well as progressive Christians. And this is where my heart breaks because I know we're not doing enough. I know you feel alone and neglected and forsaken and beaten up over what's happened. And I'm very sorry. It's heartbreaking to see. It's heartbreaking to think about. I think progressive Christians know how to use a court system. We've done so very well. Our weaknesses were aging church denominations and congregations. We don't have the physical strength or the energy to do what we want to do. Our hearts are there, but our bodies will not always allow us to do what we want to do. Some of our churches are very poor. We do not have the large mega media churches that bring in millions of dollars and influence tens of thousands of people every week face-to-face and many more on social media. We can't do it. We just don't have that kind of power. And our clergy tend to be more intellectual in their approach and much less charismatic than what you see in the evangelical megachurches. And the homophobic ministers can often preach a sermon that will blow the doors off the churches. And some of the progressive clergy can't do it. And we're often too polite when we call out injury and damage. And the other thing is, we don't say what we've been doing. We rarely talk about what we've accomplished. And everyone needs to hear that. LGBT people from coast to coast in this continent need to hear what we've been doing so they do not feel alone.